On Christmas, my father gave gifts to everyone. Except me. I sat there like I didn't exist. When I asked, my mom said coldly, "Why waste money on you?" She added, "We only keep you around out of habit." My brother smirked. "You're not on our level." I smiled and walked away. January 2nd, 8:30 a.m. A package was left at the door. My brother opened it and screamed, "Mom, look at this." "Dad, something's wrong." My dad started panicking. "Oh no, I can't reach him anymore." Before I tell you about the absolute ruins of their fake empire and the moment I finally held up a mirror to their massive lies, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and listen to the whole story. It was Christmas morning. The kind of morning that looks perfectly manufactured for a holiday catalog. I remember the drive over to my parents' estate in the suburbs of Savannah. The air was crisp, the sky was a bright, piercing blue, and the neighborhood was lined with massive homes, each trying to outdo the other with extravagant light displays. I parked my car, a reliable, unassuming sedan, next to my brother Elijah's brand new Porsche and my father's pristine luxury SUV. Walking into that house was always an exercise in managing my own expectations. The smell of expensive pine, cinnamon, and freshly brewed artisanal espresso hit me the second the heavy oak door swung open. The living room was massive. A 12-foot tree stood in the center, dripping with imported glass ornaments. My father, Richard, stood right in front of the tree. He looked like a benevolent king preparing to hand out favors to his loyal subjects. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive cashmere sweater, his silver hair perfectly styled. He loved this. He lived for the performance of wealth. My mother, Dana, was perched on the edge of the cream-colored sofa. Her posture was rigidly perfect. She wore silk loungewear that probably cost more than my first car. Next to her was my younger brother, Elijah, the undisputed golden boy of the family. He had the sharp jawline, the perfectly styled hair, and the effortless arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. Beside him sat his fiancée, Sarah, looking beautiful and impeccably groomed, holding a crystal glass of orange juice. I took my usual seat in the armchair by the window, the one slightly outside the main circle of conversation. I held a mug of black coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. "All right, everyone, let's get to the good stuff," my father announced, his voice booming with forced holiday cheer. He started handing out the wrapped boxes. He handed my mother a velvet box. She opened it to reveal a heavy, solid gold bracelet. She held it up to the light, admiring it as if she had earned it through grueling hard labor rather than simply marrying into the Sloan name. Next was Elijah. My father tossed him a sleek, dark Cartier box. Elijah didn't even look surprised. A nasty, smug grin plastered across his face before he even flipped the lid open. He knew it was an expensive watch. He expected nothing less. Then my father turned to Sarah. He handed her a beautifully wrapped package containing a custom leather travel case with her initials stamped in gold foil. "Welcome to the family, Sarah," he said warmly. She beamed and thanked him profusely. I sat there, sipping my coffee. I waited. There was a pile of torn wrapping paper on the floor, and the space beneath the tree was entirely empty. My father brushed his hands together, smiled broadly at the room, and walked over to the breakfast buffet spread on the dining table. "Who wants eggs?" he asked. I stared at the empty space under the tree. My mind raced. I thought maybe there was a mistake. Maybe one of the bags had been left in the hallway closet. Maybe there was a small envelope with my name on it tucked into the branches. Cleared my throat. I kept my voice light, trying not to sound accusatory. "Hey, Dad, did a box get left in the hall by mistake?" The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. My mother stopped buttering her toast. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. It was not a look of maternal warmth or even mild embarrassment. It was the exact look you give a stain on a white rug. Her lips thinned into a hard, cruel line. "Why waste money on you?" she said. Her voice was flat, cold, absolutely devoid of emotion. I froze. I literally felt the breath leave my lungs. "Excuse me," I whispered. She took a delicate sip of her mimosa, set the crystal flute down, and looked right into my eyes. "You don't contribute to the family image, Mason. We only keep you around out of habit." I turned my head to look at my father. I expected him to step in. I expected him to say she had had too much champagne, to scold her, to laugh it off as a terrible joke. He did not even look up from his plate of eggs. He just adjusted the cuffs of his cashmere sweater and took a bite of bacon. His silence was louder than her words. His silence was an endorsement. Elijah leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked me up and down, that nasty little smirk playing on his lips. "Don't take it so hard, Mason," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're just not on our level." I sat there with my coffee going completely cold in my hand. For 31 years, I had tried to earn a seat at this table. I had tried to be the good son, the responsible son. And in 5 seconds, they had stripped away the final, polite lie I had been telling myself. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my coffee mug at the wall. I didn't cry. I did the only dignified thing left to do when people are actively trying to erase you from your own family. I smiled. I stood up slowly, placed the mug precisely on a coaster, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and walked out the front door. I didn't say a single word. I heard the heavy door click shut behind me. That click was the sound of my tolerance expiring forever. To understand why that Christmas morning broke something so fundamental inside me, you have to understand the grand illusion my family lived in. My father ran a luxury home furnishing showroom in downtown Savannah called Sloan House Interiors. He loved telling anyone who would listen, at the country club, at dinner parties, at the golf course, that it was a legacy business. He built his entire personality around being a man of superior taste, strict discipline, and old-school wealth. He walked around in tailored suits, inspecting fabric swatches like he was examining crown jewels. My mother floated through charity luncheons, art gallery openings, and high society fundraisers. She firmly believed she was the absolute pinnacle of refinement. She would spend hours talking about the importance of breeding and social standing. And then there was Elijah. Elijah was the face of the brand. He didn't actually do any of the hard work, but he looked fantastic doing nothing. He was the golden boy. He ran the social media accounts, posting photos of silk sofas, imported Italian lighting, and carefully curated tablescapes with captions about timeless elegance and the Sloan standard. He had hundreds of thousands of followers who bought into the fantasy that he was a young, brilliant design mogul. To the outside world, the Sloans were polished, successful, and completely untouchable. And then there was me, Mason. I was the dark stain on their pristine aesthetic. I didn't go into the showroom business. I didn't care about imported marble or the thread count of Egyptian cotton sheets. I worked in commercial acquisitions and asset restructuring. I spent my days looking at complex spreadsheets, distressed properties, corporate tax loopholes, and heavy debt exposure. I understood the massive, unforgiving difference between looking rich and actually being solvent. My family dismissed my career entirely. They openly mocked it. They called it my little paperwork job. Whenever I tried to talk about a successful acquisition or a promotion, my father would wave his hand and change the subject to the new shipment of chandeliers. They acted like my comfortable, self-made salary was somehow dirty or boring because it wasn't tied to their precious, glamorous brand. I was the invisible son, the extra, the guy they cropped out of the holiday photos because I wore off-the-rack suits instead of tailored Italian wool. I accepted it for years. I swallowed the insults. I thought that if I just stayed quiet, if I was dependable and caused no drama, they would eventually love me. I was so incredibly wrong. The deepest, most pathetic irony of my family's staggering arrogance was that their entire kingdom was built entirely on my foundation. 6 years ago, my father's terrible business management finally caught up with him. He had made a series of disastrous, impulsive inventory purchases right before a brutal national financial crunch. He had completely mismanaged a dispute with their commercial landlord, and the eviction notices were already printed. To make matters worse, his primary bank had reviewed the showroom's plunging revenue and was preparing to pull their massive line of credit. The Great Sloane House Interiors was exactly 3 weeks away from absolute public bankruptcy. I remember walking into my father's office that year. He was a wreck. He was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, his face pale, his hands shaking. He wasn't afraid of losing the business. He was terrified that his country club friends would find out he was a fraud. He was terrified of the public humiliation. That was when I stepped in. I didn't do it to humiliate him. I didn't do it to hold power over him. I did it because I still genuinely believed in the concept of family. I still thought I could buy their respect. I had just closed a massive commercial real estate deal in Charlotte, and my commission payout was substantial. I took that entire payout and set up a private holding company. I used my holding company to approach the angry landlord and outright bought the actual building their flagship showroom operated in. I didn't stop there. I cleared their massive rent arrears. I sat down with their angry vendors and negotiated their debt exposure down to a manageable fraction, using my own professional credibility. And then, I did the most dangerous thing a financial professional can do. I signed a personal guarantee. I personally guaranteed the seasonal inventory line of credit at the bank. I put my own credit score, my own assets, and my own financial neck on the chopping block to keep their doors open. I hired a brilliant, ruthless lawyer named Evelyn to handle all the paperwork discreetly. I wanted to protect the family name, but more importantly, I wanted to protect the Sloane House trademark, which my late grandmother had actually assigned to me in a private transfer years ago because she knew Richard would eventually run it into the ground. When the dust settled and the doors stayed open, how did my family react? Richard went straight back to the golf course and told his buddies that he had pulled off a miraculous, genius business turnaround. Dana hosted a dinner party and called the survival a blessing from above. Elijah posted a smug video on Instagram talking about how the family always lands on its feet because of their superior business acumen and unmatched work ethic. None of them ever bothered to read the paperwork. None of them ever bothered to understand what I had actually done. They thought I just helped file some bankruptcy forms. They never grasped that the very floor they stood on belonged to me. The financial rescue was mine. The only reason their expensive display lights stayed on every winter was my signature at the bank. For 6 long years, they operated inside my building. I charged them an insultingly low, below-market month-to-month rent. I did it just to keep the tax paperwork legal. I never threw my ownership in their faces. I let Richard play the king of the castle. I let Elijah play the successful heir to an empire he didn't own a single brick of. And how did they repay my silence and my protection? With relentless, grinding, daily disrespect. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. It was being consistently seated at the very end of the table near the kitchen door during Thanksgiving dinners. It was the time I tried to bring up the necessity of structuring a proper, long-term commercial lease, and Richard waved me off, saying, "Don't bother me with trivial accounting matters, Mason. I have a massive design consultation in 10 minutes. It was the way Dana would introduce Elijah to her wealthy friends as the future of interior design, and then gesture vaguely toward me and say, "And this is Mason, he does something with taxes and spreadsheets." They were funding their lavish fantasy with my money, and they were treating me like an awkward cousin who just kept showing up uninvited. They deeply resented the fact that they had needed me 6 years ago, so they overcompensated by pushing me down at every opportunity. Narcissists can only feel tall if they force everyone else to their knees. The Christmas incident wasn't an isolated event. It wasn't a sudden slip of the tongue. It was simply the first time they felt secure enough to stop pretending their cruelty was an accident. It was the moment they said the quiet part out loud. When I walked out of their house that Christmas morning, I didn't drive around aimlessly. I didn't punch the steering wheel. I didn't shed a single tear. I drove straight back to my condo, the heater blasting, my mind terrifyingly clear and sharp. I took off my coat, poured a tall glass of ice water, and sat down at my kitchen island. I opened my laptop and pulled up my secure financial files. I didn't look at photos. I looked at numbers. I looked at the property taxes I had paid out of pocket on their building for 6 years. I looked at the commercial insurance premiums, the emergency roof repairs I had covered when a storm hit 2 years ago, the massive line of credit I had renewed year after year, signing my own name so my father could play pretend, the preferential month-to-month occupancy agreement I had foolishly allowed to drift on because family was supposed to mean something. I picked up my phone and called Evelyn. It was 1 p.m. on Christmas Day. She answered on the second ring. Evelyn knew my family. She had seen the original bailout paperwork. She knew the history. "Evelyn," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. "It's time. Draw it up." She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just said, "Tell me what you want." I laid it out like a military strike. By Monday morning, she had done exactly what a highly paid, brilliant lawyer does. She made my boundaries legally binding. Effective immediately, my personal guarantee on their massive January inventory line of credit was entirely withdrawn. I was stepping off the tracks, and the train was coming. Effective immediately, their month-to-month preferential occupancy of the flagship premises was terminated. They had exactly 30 days to vacate my building. Effective immediately, any use of the Sloan House trademark without my express written authorization would expose them to massive injunctive action. Effective immediately, all communication was to go exclusively through my legal counsel. Before I hung up, I gave Evelyn one final, very specific instruction. I asked her to place the physical documents inside a pristine white gift box. The exact kind of heavy, luxurious box you would use for a high-end Christmas present. I asked her to put that box inside the courier package. Evelyn paused for a second on the line, then chuckled dryly. "Symbolism, Mason? If they want to talk about gifts," I replied, "I'm finally giving them one they actually earned." On January 2nd, the first business day after the holidays, at exactly 8:30 in the morning, a private courier walked up to the heavy glass doors of Sloan House Interiors. The doors hadn't even opened to the public yet. I was sitting at my desk across town in my own office, watching the clock on my computer screen tick over. Later, Claire, the senior showroom manager who had always been decent to me, told me exactly how the explosion happened. Elijah saw the courier through the glass and eagerly opened the door. He saw the premium packaging and immediately assumed it was a late corporate holiday gift from a wealthy client. He signed for it, brought it over to the central marble display table, the exact table where he filmed his pretentious Instagram content, and grabbed a silver letter opener. He sliced the tape. He peeled back the expensive tissue paper, probably expecting a bottle of aged scotch or a designer accessory. Instead, he found a stark white box. Inside the box was a thick stack of legal documents printed on Evelyn's heavy, intimidating law firm letterhead. And sitting right on top of the papers was a heavy brass key tag that matched the master lock of the building. Claire said Elijah read the first paragraph of the eviction notice. The blood completely drained from his face. His perfectly styled hair seemed to lose its bounce. He let out a loud, panicked shout that echoed through the empty showroom. "Mom! Mom! Get out here! Look at this!" Dana, who had been in the back arranging a floral display for a client meeting, rushed over. She snatched the paper from Elijah's trembling hand. She read the words "notice to vacate." Her knees practically gave out. She collapsed heavily onto a velvet ottoman, her hands starting to shake uncontrollably. Richard marched out of his glass-walled office, annoyed by the screaming. "What is going on out here?" he snapped. He grabbed the papers from his wife. His eyes scanned the bold legal terms. Terminate, vacate, withdraw guarantee. The absolute panic set in instantly. The illusion shattered into a million pieces. Richard grabbed his phone from his pocket and called my cell. I sat at my desk, watching my screen light up with his name. I let it ring. It rang out to voicemail. 30 seconds later, he called again. Ring. Then my mother called. Ring. Then Elijah called. Ring. By 9:05 a.m., my phone was blowing up with voicemails. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and hit play on the first one. It was Richard. He was breathing heavily, trying to project authority but failing miserably. Mason, pick up the damn phone. This is outrageous. There has to be some misunderstanding here. Call me immediately. The second voicemail was my mother. Her voice was trembling, entirely stripped of all its usual high society arrogance. Mason, darling, you are not doing this. You cannot do this over a holiday misunderstanding. Call your father right now. People will talk. The third was Elijah. The smug, condescending tone from Christmas morning was completely gone, replaced by raw, high-pitched desperation. Hey man, if this is some weird stunt, it's not funny. We have major clients coming in today. Dad is freaking out. You need to call me back right now. I didn't call anyone back. I listened to every single voicemail once, saved the audio files, and forwarded them directly to Evelyn. My family had built their entire comfort zone, their entire fake empire out of my silence. Now, my silence was going to absolutely destroy them. They didn't wait for my call. Narcissists cannot handle being ignored. It is their ultimate kryptonite. The very next day, a heavy, aggressive knock echoed through my condo. I didn't even have to look through the peephole. I knew exactly who it was. I opened the door to find the entire family standing in my hallway. Richard, Dana, Elijah, and slightly behind them, Sarah, who looked deeply uncomfortable and confused. Richard pushed his way into my entryway before I even invited them in. He was wearing an expensive gray overcoat, but it was buttoned wrong. He looked frayed, like a man who hadn't slept a wink. Enough of these theatrics, Mason, Richard barked, pointing a finger directly at my chest. We are going to resolve this like adults right now. I didn't back away. I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the wall. Which adults are those? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. The ones who hand out luxury gifts to everyone in the room except their own son, and call that normal family behavior? Dana pushed past Richard, stepping into my personal space. She pasted on that rigid, fake social smile she used when she was trying to manipulate a situation at a charity board meeting. Mason, darling, she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. You are blowing a simple family misunderstanding way out of proportion. Turning a hurt feeling into a malicious business attack is beneath you. Your grandmother would be ashamed. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't raise my voice. I looked her dead in the eye. What exactly did I misunderstand, Mom? Was it the part where you proudly announced that you only keep me around out of habit? Or was it the part where you looked at me and asked why you should waste money on me? Elijah rolled his eyes, throwing his hands up in the air like a dramatic teenager. Oh, here we go. You are always so literal, Mason. You are so sensitive. We were stressed out. Christmas is stressful. You're using your money as a weapon to punish us for a bad morning because you've always been jealous of me. I'm not punishing you, I replied, staring at my brother until he looked away. I am simply agreeing with you. You said I wasn't on your level. You were absolutely right. I am removing myself from your level. The documents are legally binding. The 30-day eviction notice stands. If you want to discuss the commercial transition, you can do it through Evelyn. Richard's face turned a violent shade of bright red. The polished public persona completely cracked, revealing the frantic, deeply insecure man underneath. He stepped so close to me I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with sweat. The vein on his temple was pulsing hard. You would never have that building without the Sloan name. Richard spat, his voice shaking with rage. I built this business. You owe me. I didn't blink. I bought the building with my own money, Richard. And you wouldn't be standing inside it if I hadn't bailed your incompetent management out 6 years ago. I paused, letting the silence hang for a second. By the way, the bank has already been notified about the withdrawal of my guarantee. Richard froze. The anger in his eyes was instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Elijah turned the color of a sheet of paper. Sarah, who had been quiet the whole time, looked back and forth between us. Her eyes were wide. She was a smart girl, and the pieces were finally clicking together in her head. She finally understood that her fiancé's wealth was a total mirage. "Wait," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "What bank? Elijah, what guarantee is he talking about?" No one answered her. Richard swallowed hard. He suddenly lowered his voice, dropping the aggression, trying to play the concerned, intimate father. "Mason, please," he whispered, glancing nervously at Sarah. "The line of credit issue it's temporary. If you just stop acting completely irrational, I am sure we can fix this quietly." I let out a short, cold laugh. It echoed in the hallway. "Let me ask you a very simple question. If I am so irrational, so unimportant, so entirely beneath all of you, why did every single one of you come running to my door the exact second I stopped paying your bills?" They had no answer. They stood there in stunning, humiliated silence. I stepped back, put my hand on the doorknob, and looked at my father. "You said it yourself, Mom," I said softly. "Why waste money? You have 29 days to get your inventory out of my building." I shut the door in their faces and locked it. The reality of my actions was already moving much faster than their massive egos could handle. When you pull the plug on a fake empire, the collapse is spectacularly fast. By noon the next day, David, the senior commercial manager at their bank, called Richard. Since my personal guarantee was officially withdrawn, the bank's automated risk assessment system immediately flagged the Sloan House account as critically high risk. They didn't even wait for a meeting. They froze the entire discretionary line of credit. 2 massive shipping containers filled with imported Italian furniture, meant for their crucial spring collection launch, were stopped at the port. Without my signature backing the credit line, the showroom couldn't pay the customs release fees. The inventory was stuck. I received a brief, one-line email from Evelyn confirming the credit freeze. It was clinical. It was beautiful. Richard tried to call the vendors directly. He spent hours on the phone in his glass office, sweating through his custom shirts, begging for extensions. He tried to bank on his reputation, name-dropping his country club friends. But in the world of high-end retail, reputation only goes so far when the checks literally stop clearing. The vendors, smelling blood in the water and hearing rumors of a family dispute, tightened their payment terms immediately. Cash on delivery or nothing. The showroom floor, usually buzzing with elite interior designers and wealthy clients, started to feel like a sinking ship. Staff members were whispering in the break room. Elijah's perfectly curated Instagram life hit a massive brick wall. He couldn't post pictures of the highly anticipated new inventory because there was no new inventory. He was forced to recycle old photos of lamps and sofas from 2 years ago. Local industry insiders noticed. They started leaving comments asking about the delayed spring launch. Elijah panicked and turned off the comments entirely. The promotion of their grand legacy was unraveling, piece by piece, in real time, for all of Savannah to see. When toxic people lose control over you, their immediate reflex is to try and control how other people see you. Since they couldn't manipulate my bank accounts anymore, my family launched a frantic, desperate smear campaign to save face. My mother, Dana, spent hours on the phone with every aunt, uncle, cousin, and family friend she could reach. She spun a tragic, tear-filled tale about how I had suffered a severe, sudden mental breakdown. She claimed I was wildly jealous of Elijah's success, that I hated the family, and that I was trying to extort my own father out of sheer spite over a misunderstood Christmas gift. Elijah took to social media playing the ultimate victim. He posted passive-aggressive quotes on his stories about narcissistic family members, protecting your peace, and the heavy burden of dealing with ungrateful siblings who try to tear down your success. Then came the phone call from my Uncle Thomas. Thomas was Richard's older brother, a man who always played the wise, benevolent peacemaker at family reunions, but who secretly loved inserting himself into everyone's finances to feel important. "Mason, my boy," Thomas said through the phone, his tone thick with false, heavy concern. "I've been hearing some very disturbing things from your mother. You need to think about family, son. Blood is thicker than water. You can't just throw your father out on the street over a disagreement. Let's sit down, have a drink, and work this out. Think of your future, your reputation in this town. I leaned back in my office chair. I knew exactly why Thomas was calling. He wasn't calling out of love. I happened to know, through reviewing the old ledgers, that Thomas had recently loaned Richard a significant amount of money off the books to cover a personal tax issue, expecting a high return from the showroom's spring collection. If the business went under, Thomas lost his money. My reputation is perfectly fine, Uncle Thomas, I said smoothly, cutting through his fake warmth. And my future is very secure. If you're worried about the personal loan you made to Richard, I highly suggest you get in line with the rest of his creditors, because the bank is about to take everything he has. I hung up the phone. I wasn't playing their games anymore. I was immune to the guilt trips. But I didn't realize just how desperate my father had truly become. I thought he was just going to gossip. I didn't realize he was going to fight dirty. A few days later, I was sitting in Evelyn's sleek corner office downtown. The view of the city was incredible, but the atmosphere inside the room was heavy. Evelyn slid a thick, manila folder across the polished mahogany desk. She didn't look happy. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. Richard hired Mr. Vance, Evelyn said, tapping her expensive pen against the file. I knew that name. Vance was a local attorney known for being a ruthless, highly unethical attack dog. He specialized in messy corporate divorces, aggressive asset seizures, and burying opponents in endless paperwork. Vance just served us with an emergency injunction to halt the eviction, Evelyn continued. I frowned, opening the folder. On what grounds? The holding company is entirely in my name. The deed is completely clear. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. Keep reading, she said grimly. I flipped to the second page of the filing and felt a sudden, icy chill run down my spine. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Attached to the injunction was a document titled Board Minutes and Resolution. The document claimed that my holding company was merely a tax convenience, a temporary shell created by the family trust to hold the property. It explicitly stated that Sloan House Interiors possessed equitable rights to the building through years of continuous occupancy and shared business investment. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach turn and the blood roar in my ears. At the bottom of the page was an internal memo, supposedly authorizing Richard to maintain permanent, rent-free occupancy of the premises indefinitely. And sitting right there on the primary signature line was my name. It looked exactly like my signature. The sweeping loop of the M, the sharp, heavy cross of the T, the slight slant to the right. I stared at it for a long, deafeningly silent minute. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth actually ached. My own father. He was willing to forge a legal document, a literal federal crime, just to steal my building and keep his fake empire alive. He was willing to risk sending me to court, dragging my professional name through the mud, and potentially ruining my career in finance, just to protect his fragile ego. They forged it, I said, my voice barely above a harsh whisper. I never saw this document. I never, ever signed this. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes sharp and assessing. I know you didn't, Mason, but it's a damn good forgery. Vance is using this to stall the eviction. If the judge believes this is a legitimate family dispute over shared assets, Richard gets to stay in the building while we fight it out in court for months, maybe years. He's buying time to leverage your asset for a black market loan to save his inventory. I closed the folder. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it actually burned away the very last tiny shred of grief or guilt I had left for these people. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was war. I went back to my condo and spent the next 48 hours tearing through my own extensive digital archives. I didn't sleep. I drank black coffee and pulled every email chain, every bank wire transfer, every insurance rider I had ever signed regarding the building over the past 6 years. I needed undeniable proof that I operated independently. I needed to prove the signature was a fake. But proving a negative in a civil court is notoriously difficult. My hands were actually shaking slightly as I right-clicked the first file, went to Properties, and opened the advanced metadata. I sat back in the dark, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes. Who sent this? I stared at the blank burner email. There was only one other person who had physical access to Elijah's office computer. There was only one person who knew his passwords. There was only one person who had been standing in my hallway, watching the absolute terror on Richard's face when I mentioned the bank, and realizing for the very first time that she was marrying into a family of broke, desperate liars. Sarah. Sarah, who came from a respectable, hard-working family. Sarah, who was suddenly staring down the barrel of a marriage to a man who was not only financially ruined but actively committing felony fraud against his own brother. She was getting out, and as her parting gift, she was handing me the exact sword I needed to cut them down before she walked away. I smiled. A real, genuine, terrifying smile. I attached the entire zip file to an email, drafted a quick message to Evelyn, and hit send. The message was one sentence long. We have them. The day before our preliminary hearing, my father decided to try one last desperate play. He invited me to the showroom under the pretense of discussing a structured, civilized exit. I knew exactly what it was. It was an ambush, but I agreed to go, bringing Evelyn with me, because I wanted to look them in the eye one last time before I took everything away. When we walked through the heavy glass doors of Sloan House Interiors, the atmosphere was entirely different from the bustling, arrogant place I had known for years. The floor was quiet. 2 junior designers were frantically packing fabric swatches into cardboard boxes. My father was waiting for us at the massive marble conference table in the back. He wasn't alone. My mother was sitting stiffly beside him, her face completely unreadable. Elijah was leaning against the back wall, trying to look bored, though his foot was tapping nervously against the hardwood. Also at the table was their lawyer, Mr. Vance, and Claire, the senior showroom manager. They had brought Claire in as an audience. They thought having a senior staff member present would pressure me into backing down to save face. They were treating this like a performance. My father stood up. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket, trying to project the aura of a benevolent CEO handling a minor human resources issue. Mason, Richard began, his voice dipping into that deep, patronizing tone he used on difficult clients. I am glad you came. This entire situation has gotten entirely out of hand. The legal fees are piling up. The stress is tearing your mother apart. We need to remember our legacy. We need to remember blood. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Evelyn stood right behind me, her briefcase resting on the marble. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. Vance, their attack dog lawyer, slid a thick, cream-colored document across the table. My client is prepared to offer a very generous settlement to avoid dragging the family name through a public docket, Vance said smoothly. I looked down at the paper without touching it. Define generous, I said. My father cleared his throat. We are asking for an 18-month extension on the lease at the current rate, full permission to continue using the Sloan House trademark, and a mutual non-disparagement clause. He paused, leaning forward, resting his hands on the table. In exchange, Mason, I am prepared to write a private letter acknowledging your financial assistance 6 years ago. We can put this all behind us. Private letter. After 6 years of public disrespect. After treating me like a ghost in my own family. After my mother told me they only kept me around out of habit. After forging my signature on a federal legal document to steal my property. My father was offering to secretly write down that I had been useful, as long as he got to keep his fake empire for another 1.5 years. I pushed the document back across the table with one finger. No, I said. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. Mason, have you completely lost your mind? Your father is offering you an olive branch. I turned my head and looked directly at Claire, the senior manager. She looked absolutely terrified to be sitting there. Claire, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Did Richard or Dana mention to you that on Christmas morning, my mother looked me in the eye and asked why they should waste money buying me a gift? The room went dead silent. Claire's eyes widened. She stared down at her lap, her cheeks flushing bright red. Did they mention, I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet showroom, that my brother Elijah told me I wasn't on their level? Did they happen to tell you that the only reason you have received a paycheck for the last 6 years is because I personally guaranteed the inventory line of credit with my own money? That is private family business, my father snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The polished veneer was instantly gone. His face was purple with rage. It became public business the second you forged my signature to steal my building, Richard, I said. I stood up. Elijah pushed off the wall, his fists clenched, but he didn't take a step closer. He was a coward when he didn't have a screen to hide behind. We will see you in court tomorrow, I said. I looked at Vance, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable with the absolute certainty in my voice. Bring your checkbook, Mr. Vance. You're going to need it to pay for your own legal defense when the judge sees what your clients handed you. I turned and walked out. Evelyn followed right behind me. We didn't look back. The hearing the next morning was not dramatic in the way movies like to portray courtrooms. There was no thunder, no shouting, no surprise witnesses bursting through the heavy oak doors. It was something much more terrifying for people like my family. It was a slow, methodical, completely clinical humiliation under harsh fluorescent lights. Judge Harrison was a no-nonsense man in his late 50s. He had a reputation for deeply despising family drama that wasted the court's time. My father came in wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit. He sat at the respondent's table with his back perfectly straight, trying to look like a pillar of the community who was being victimized by a greedy son. My mother sat beside him, rigid and highly offended by the mere presence of common people in the gallery. Elijah sat in the row behind them, looking exhausted. He kept checking his phone, probably watching his follower count drop as the local rumors spread. Mr. Vance stood up first. He delivered a passionate, aggressive opening statement about informal family agreements, shared assets, and the sacred trust between a father and a son. He argued that my holding company was merely a vessel and that the forged board minutes proved my intent to let the family stay forever. Judge Harrison interrupted him 3 minutes into the speech. Mr. Vance, the judge said, his voice grating like sandpaper, I don't care about your client's emotional attachment to the brick and mortar. I care about paper. Does your client have any records of paying commercial, market-rate rent consistent with an ownership claim? Vance cleared his throat. Your Honor, the family arrangement was fluid. That means no, Judge Harrison said dryly. He turned his attention to our table. Counselor, you filed an emergency motion to strike the respondent's evidence. The floor is yours. Evelyn stood up. She didn't deliver a passionate speech. She didn't talk about my hurt feelings. She just picked up a single, thin folder and walked to the podium. Your Honor, Evelyn began, her voice crisp and clear, the petitioner fully owns the property. The respondent has submitted a document titled Board Minutes and Resolution as proof of an equitable right to remain on the premises. They claim this document was executed 6 years ago and signed by my client. She handed a stack of papers to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge and then to Mr. Vance. We requested the native file of that document during emergency discovery, Evelyn continued. What you have in your hands, Your Honor, is the certified metadata report extracted from that exact digital file. I watched my family's table. Mr. Vance looked down at the paper. His brow furrowed. Richard leaned over to look at it. Elijah suddenly sat up perfectly straight, his face draining of all color. The metadata undeniably proves, Evelyn said, turning slightly to look directly at my father, that this document did not exist 6 years ago. It was created on December 29th of this year. Just 4 days ago, it was authored on a computer registered to Elijah Sloan. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused for a fraction of a second. Furthermore, Evelyn stated relentlessly, the digital log shows that a transparent image file labeled Mason_SIG_scan was inserted onto the signature line at exactly 11:45 p.m. My client did not sign that agreement. The respondents fabricated a legal document and submitted it to this court to commit real estate fraud. Judge Harrison slowly lowered the paper. He took off his glasses. He looked over at Mr. Vance, whose mouth was slightly open. A good lawyer knows when his clients have just strapped a bomb to their own case. "Mr. Vance," Judge Harrison said. His voice was no longer bored. It was dangerously quiet. "Did your clients provide you with a forged document to submit to my court?" Vance literally took a step back from his own clients. "Your Honor, I relied on the representations made by Mr. Sloan regarding the authenticity of the records." My father stood up, panic completely taking over his features. "Your Honor, please, it was just a draft. It was a misunderstanding of the corporate structure." "Sit down, Mr. Sloan," the judge barked, slamming his gavel so hard the sound cracked like a whip. "You do not speak unless spoken to." Richard collapsed back into his chair. My mother covered her face with her hands. Elijah looked like he was going to be physically sick right there in the gallery. There are certain moments in life when a massive lie dies in public, and you can almost hear the air leave the room. This was one of those moments. The arrogant, untouchable Sloan family was completely stripped naked in front of the law. The ruling was swift and entirely devastating. Judge Harrison granted my injunction in full. He confirmed my absolute right to terminate their occupancy immediately. He barred them from using the Sloan House trademark. And before he dismissed us, he looked directly at my father. "Mr. Sloan, consider yourself incredibly fortunate that this is a civil proceeding," the judge warned coldly. "I am referring the matter of this fabricated document to the district attorney's office for review. I highly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel." The gavel fell. It was over. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. For the next 3 weeks, reality did what arrogant people hate most. Kept moving forward without caring about their feelings. The collapse of my family's fake empire was swift and brutal. Sarah packed her bags the morning after the court hearing. I found out later through the grapevine that she had looked Elijah right in the eye and told him she refused to stick around for a future divorce or to visit him in a federal penitentiary. The engagement was permanently broken. Elijah was left completely alone in his expensive, empty apartment. The vendors didn't just stop shipping new products. They aggressively recalled what they could. Massive moving trucks pulled up to the back loading dock of the showroom. I watched from across the street in my car as repossession agents hauled out imported silk sofas, massive crystal chandeliers, and custom dining tables. My father, the man who had spent his entire life acting like he was royalty, was suddenly forced to wear jeans and supervise bubble wrap and discounted fixture sales under an emergency timeline. The local business magazine quietly removed Sloan House interiors from their upcoming feature on legacy businesses of Savannah, after Evelyn sent a very polite but utterly devastating legal notice regarding the trademark injunction. My mother's social circle shrank overnight. The charity boards she prided herself on suddenly stopped returning her calls. In high society, prestige is everything. Without the showroom, without the money, and with the heavy rumor of a criminal fraud investigation hanging over their heads, Dana became a social pariah. When the absolute final deadline came, 30 days after the notice was served, I didn't go to the showroom alone. I brought my lawyer and a hired locksmith. The heavy glass doors were locked. The large display windows, usually perfectly arranged, were completely empty, showing only the bare concrete floor inside. The locksmith drilled the heavy master lock and we walked in. The place wasn't destroyed in the way vindictive people destroy homes in the movies. They hadn't taken sledgehammers to the walls. But it was damaged in a much more petty, expensive way. It was the revenge of incredibly small people. Custom brass drapery rods had been deliberately bent beyond reuse. The expensive display lamps that were built into the walls were left behind, but every single light bulb had been unscrewed and taken. The edges of the custom marble reception desk had been heavily scraped by what looked like a metal tool. The vendor contact binders were gone. It was petty, time-consuming, and entirely deliberate. I walked slowly through the massive, echoing space. Felt like walking through a graveyard. I stopped at the central marble table, the only piece of furniture left in the room. This was the spot where Elijah used to film his content. Sitting perfectly in the dead center of the table was a small, pristine white gift box. I walked over to it. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a deep, heavy exhaustion. I lifted the lid. Inside the box, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was one of the thick, expensive holiday gift tags from our Christmas morning breakfast. It was my tag. It was completely blank. No name, no gift description, just the empty tag. Tucked beneath the tag was a small note written in Elijah's sloppy handwriting. It read, "Some things never change." I stared at that note for a long time. I almost laughed out loud, because even after the humiliating court hearings, the frantic panic, the lost engagement, and the total collapse of their business, they still desperately needed me to know that in their private, twisted mythology, I was the problem. That is the incredible thing about toxic narcissists. They can lose absolutely everything real in their lives, their money, their reputation, their family, and they will still fiercely cling to the fantasy that they were morally superior while they were falling. The locksmith walked up behind me. He looked at the box and then at the scraped marble table. "Do you want me to throw that garbage away, boss?" he asked. I looked at the blank tag. "No," I said quietly. I slipped the heavy paper tag into the breast pocket of my coat. Some trophies arrive in stranger packaging than others. For months later, the dust had completely settled. I sold the massive downtown building to a large hospitality group based out of Atlanta. They wanted to turn it into a boutique hotel. The sale price was astronomical. It was more cash than my father had ever told people his entire showroom business was worth. My previous salary felt like pocket change compared to the wire transfer that hit my account that morning. I didn't keep the Sloan House trademark active. I completely retired it. I licensed a few specific design archives that were directly connected to my grandmother's original work to a historical society, and I let the rest of the fake family myth die with a dignity they had never earned. While finalizing the trademark retirement, Evelyn handed me a sealed envelope she had found in my grandmother's original trust documents from the safety deposit box. My grandmother had passed away 10 years ago. I sat in Evelyn's office and broke the wax seal. It was a handwritten letter from my grandmother. "Mason," the letter read, "If you are reading this, it means you finally had to use the trademark. I always knew Richard was blinded by his own vanity. He cares more about how things look than what they are built on. Your true inheritance isn't just the name on a piece of paper. Your inheritance is the grit to survive them. I gave you the rights because you are the only one in this family who understands the value of hard work. Do not let them drain you. Build your own house." I read the letter 3 times. My vision blurred slightly. For 31 years, I thought I was completely alone in that family. I thought no one saw my worth. But she had seen it. She had known the whole time. It was the ultimate validation from beyond the grave. As for my family, Savannah is a small city when you run in certain circles. People talk. Some people said I was a ruthless, cold-hearted corporate shark. Some said my father absolutely had it coming. Some insisted there had to be more to the story because nobody would really destroy a family business over a missed Christmas gift. That was always the easiest way for outsiders to misunderstand what happened. It was never about the gifts under the tree. It was about the hierarchy. It was about being treated as structurally lesser by the exact people whose comfortable lifestyle depended on my willingness to keep funding their lies. It was about being just useful enough to exploit, but invisible enough to openly mock. After the eviction, my father rented a much smaller, cramped space in a strip mall miles outside the historic district. He tried to reopen under a new name, but without the prime downtown location, without the established credit relationships, and without the grand image, it never had the same pull. The wealthy clients didn't want to drive out to a strip mall to buy a sofa. The business was failing slowly. My mother's life became a shadow of what it was. Invitations to galas completely dried up. She spent her days in a smaller rented house, complaining to anyone who would listen about how ungrateful the younger generation was. Elijah tried to pivot into lifestyle consulting and independent content creation. But brand deals dry up instantly when your audience realizes you're elegant. Wealthy World was mostly staged on borrowed ground that you got kicked off of. He ended up taking a regular salary job managing social media for a local car dealership. He didn't post much anymore. Over the next year, my father sent me exactly 3 letters in the mail. The first letter was pure, unadulterated rage. He called me a traitor. He said I had single-handedly destroyed the family legacy and that he would never forgive me. The second letter, arriving 6 months later, was pathetic. He talked about how hard the new store was. He hinted heavily that he needed a short-term loan to make payroll. He signed it, "With love, Dad." The third letter arrived right before the next Christmas. It was shorter. He wrote that he didn't understand how I could walk away so easily. He asked one single question: "Why did you become so cold?" I sat at my kitchen counter holding that letter. I almost answered it. Not because I owed him an explanation, but because the question itself was so incredibly revealing. Even after everything, the eviction, the court case, the forged signature, he still fully believed the coldness had started with me. He couldn't comprehend that the coldness actually started with a father who could comfortably watch his son sit empty-handed on Christmas morning while everyone else in the room unwrapped proof that they mattered. I threw the letter in the shredder. I didn't write back. I mourned the idea of my family, like attending a funeral for people who were still alive. But I was finally free. Some questions do not deserve answers. They just deserve to be left in the past. I took the capital from the building sale and launched my own consulting firm that spring. We focus specifically on distressed asset transitions and family-held commercial disputes. It turns out, there is an incredibly massive market for helping people untangle businesses that are held together purely by toxic ego and silence. I gave myself a massive promotion from the invisible son to the CEO of my own life. I was very good at it. Walk into my new office today, and you won't see degrees or awards plastered all over the walls. Right behind my desk, framed in a simple, heavy black matte frame, hangs that blank white gift tag. No name, no inscription, completely empty. Clients sit in my leather chairs, look at it, and sometimes ask what it signifies. I tell them it is a daily reminder. A reminder of the massive, soul-crushing cost of waiting too long for toxic people to acknowledge what they already know they owe you. People ask me if I feel guilty. The answer is absolutely not. I felt grief. Deep, heavy grief. I felt an intense rage. I felt that sour, terrible exhaustion that comes when you finally realize that your family knows exactly where to insert the knife to wound you, and they still act completely shocked when you finally... Every now and then, usually on quiet, cold winter mornings when the air smells like pine, I think back to that Christmas. I think of my father standing by the tree, my mother's cruel smile, Elijah's smug face. And then I think of January 2nd, the courier package, the absolute panic, the desperate phone calls I never answered, the exact moment the people who had treated me like background noise realized the entire room had been wired through me all along. If I have learned anything from walking through this fire, it is this: blood is not proof of love. Physical proximity is not proof of respect. And being tolerated is not the same thing as belonging. They spent years trying to convince me I wasn't on their level. In the end, they were right about one thing only. I was never meant to stay where they put me. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, giving everything to people who only take? If you made it to the very end of this video, I want you to comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. It's the secret code for the 1% Club, the group of amazing people who actually have the attention span and the empathy to listen to a full story until the final word. It lets me know who my real listeners are. Please don't forget to hit the like button and follow the channel so we can keep sharing these journeys together. Take care of yourselves, set your boundaries, and I'll see you in the next one.